I'm looking at two Netflix movies that are hoping for some awards season love, but are they worth their weight in gold? Let's find out. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my reviews of Mank and The Prom, two films recently released on Netflix, and let's start with Mank, which is the latest from director David Fincher. It is a huge awards season hopeful, many people saying that this could be Netflix's best shot at a Best Picture Oscar since they've come oh so close just a couple of other times. Now, I'd meant to review this movie closer to when it came out on Netflix about a week and a half ago. However, Warner Brothers and AT&T decided to completely blow up the way that movies are distributed, and I got a little sidetracked, but I wanted to make sure that I reviewed this film because I do think that it is going to be one of the movies come awards season time, which is pushed a little bit into 2021 for the first time due to all the COVID-19 delays. This is going to be one of the movies that is the most talked about. I think you're going to see it in a lot of different categories, and for good reason. It has the prestige, certainly both in front of and behind the camera, of an awards film. Not only David Fincher, but Gary Oldman in the lead role. He plays Herman Mankiewicz, who famously wrote the screenplay for Citizen Kane either for or with Orson Welles, depending on who you ask. Just that would be a very interesting subject matter for a movie, but Mank also focuses on Mankiewicz's real-life friendship with the publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst, who famously served as an inspiration for the character of Charles Foster Kane in Citizen Kane, and the friendship between Mankiewicz and Marion Davies, who's played by Amanda Seyfried. Mankiewicz writing the screenplay for Citizen Kane and his real-life friendship with the inspiration behind the film, supposedly, William Randolph Hearst, those two things would also have made for a very interesting thing for Mank to focus on, but it also focuses on the 1934 California gubernatorial election, which saw Upton Sinclair running on the Democratic ticket, and we see Louis B. Mayer's attempt to basically smear Sinclair as a socialist in order to keep him from being elected. And I think this stew of different events may be my biggest drawback about Mank, because it's certainly not anything technically or acting-wise. As always with David Fincher, this is a meticulously perfect looking film. It has beautiful black and white cinematography by Eric Messerschmidt. This is actually his first feature film after working with Fincher on his Netflix series Mindhunter. There is a beautiful lush score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. This actually sounds much different than any other score that I've heard those two collaborate with Fincher on. And then I really don't have anything to pick on as far as the acting goes. Pretty much every major and minor role in this movie is acted really well. Gary Oldman, of course, centers the cast, anchors the cast with his performance as Mankiewicz, who is a very troubled man, a heavy drinker, a degenerate gambler. When you look at Mank in individual pieces, I think it is really great work. It's when you try to zoom out and figure out how it all fits together as one coherent whole that I struggle with the movie. And I think part of it is probably because this is a passion project for David Fincher. He's been wanting to make this movie since the 90s. His late father, Jack Fincher, wrote the screenplay. He has sole screenplay credit on this movie. I think it needed a little more finesse. I think it needed a little more work culling all of this stuff into one cohesive whole. Is it Mankiewicz and Citizen Kane and William Randolph Hearst and how that all came together? Or is it Mankiewicz and how he doesn't quite fit into his time? How he takes a stand against those who wish to railroad Upton Sinclair and paint him as a socialist? And this is certainly something that we've seen, the idea of the little invention of fake news, the manufacturing of fake news. There is a certain point watching the movie where I kind of wondered where we're going with it. What's the aim of it? And it is a character study. It's very much a character study, and Gary Oldman is a fantastic actor, but the movie did leave me a little bit cold because I found myself engaged in specific moments, but the movie itself never really drew me into its story overall. That being said, as with every other film that David Fincher makes, I think that this is filmmaking at a very high level. And I would recommend Mank. I think that when we look back on David Fincher's filmography, I'm not so sure this movie is going to be near the top, but he is such a talented filmmaker, and he surrounds himself with such a talented cast and so many talented people working on the film that even though the story isn't necessarily something that drew me in, I did find myself admiring the film, admiring the performances, and that's enough for me to give it a recommendation. But I also think that there's a lot left on the table by not choosing which direction you want to focus, and by the time we come to the end of the film and it sort of decides that it wants to focus on the Citizen Kane part, I found myself wishing they'd spent more time developing that, because we build up to this confrontation between Mankiewicz and Orson Welles, and I was hoping hoping we get to the next step, and then we sort of jump to the end. So in my final estimation, I would call this an unfocused but impressive film from David Fincher. The next movie I'm going to talk about is one that was actually just released this past weekend on Netflix, and that is Ryan Murphy's The Prom. This is just the latest venture between Ryan Murphy and Netflix. They signed a huge overall deal not too long ago. The Prom is based on a 2018 stage musical of the same name. At the heart of this film, you have a really great romance between Joe Ellen Pellman and Ariana DeBose, who play Emma and Alyssa. Emma and Alyssa have been together for a very long time. Emma wants to take her to the prom, and Alyssa's mother, who is the head of the PTA, decides that she's going to cancel the dance instead of allowing a gay couple to attend. Now, what she doesn't know is that her daughter, Alyssa, is Emma's girlfriend. And so a lot of that conflict between these two characters comes from the fact that Emma is ready to live her life out, to express her true self, and Alyssa is not quite ready to do that. And these two actors, Joe Ellen Pellman and Ariana DeBose, are really, really talented. They're relative newcomers to the film world. I liked watching them. I bought them as a couple, and I really was invested in their story. Unfortunately for The Prom, there are also a bunch of movie stars in the movie who, much like the characters they portray, barge into the story, shove the protagonists aside, completely distract the attention to themselves, and make things worse. Emma and Alyssa should be center stage, but instead we have Meryl Streep, James Corden, Andrew Rannells, and Nicole Kidman playing four pretty unsuccessful Broadway stars who read about the situation on Twitter and decide to go from New York to small-town Indiana, pretty much for publicity, for clout, for exposure, and to make a good name for themselves, which they can't do on stage. There's one thing about The Prom that I found very interesting, which is that there's a double layer of things going on in so much of the movie. It is satirizing one thing, but at the same time, the movie itself is doing the thing that it's satirizing. For example, at the beginning of the film, we see these four Broadway actors. They're painted as these elite, out-of-touch snobs who feel like they would deign to go to Middle America from the great city of New York. And the movie invites us to scorn them, invites us to judge them for that because they're very over the top. It is very clearly satire, or what the movie wants us to think is satire about these characters.
We will be the biggest thing to happen in Indiana since whatever's happened in Indiana.
I was hoping that they were setting this up for this big city sensibility where they come to small town Indiana with the thought that nobody there can be as evolved as they are, but they find out that fairness and equality is something that's universal. It's a quality that you find everywhere. That's not what the movie does at all. As a matter of fact, even though they make jokes about the fact that this is backwards Hickville, Indiana, once they get there, the message is pretty much, don't be gay in Indiana, because that's the song that Emma sings in the film. If you want your message to be that Middle America is inherently unfair, that's fine. You can have that message. But on one hand, you're asking me to scorn the New York Broadway actors for thinking that. On the other hand, you're pretty much saying that in the musical. So you're kind of trying to have it both ways. That didn't really sit well for me, but there is some stuff that's unveiled as the movie goes on. However, there were other parts that I found absolutely insufferable. For example, all of these Broadway actors are complete narcissists. And again, this is played up to the nth degree. We are invited to laugh at them and mock them and scorn them for being complete narcissists. But then we have Keegan-Michael Key, who plays the high school principal. He has a song in the movie that is literally about how the only escape from his dead-end job and the misery of being in Middle America is for him to go to a Broadway show and see the stars. So you're asking us to condemn Broadway narcissists, but at the same time, you put a song in your play/movie where the only thing that these poor saps from Middle America can do to escape their miserable lives is go sit in the footlights of a Broadway show. You can't have it both ways. You can't do the narcissism both ways. You just can't. I think this movie would have been much better served if everyone there had learned some kind of lesson. Pretty much the only arc that any of these Broadway actors get is that Meryl Streep doesn't know what Applebee's is at the beginning of the movie and does know what Applebee's is at the end of the movie. Yes, we should always be fighting for greater acceptance. 100%, especially in places where people are not accepted for who they are inside. They should have the right to live and be who they are. But the idea of marching these movie stars in to tell us all of that, yeah, I already knew that. And by the way, in the process of telling us how important it is for everyone to live and be who they really are, you're completely shoving out of the movie the two characters whose journey I was the most interested in, because that's what it should ostensibly be about. Emma and Alyssa's journey to being able to feel comfortable and expressing who they are. And I think it's kind of ironic that in a movie about a bunch of Broadway stars who threaten to overshadow a real life situation with their narcissism, we get an actual movie with a bunch of Hollywood stars who shove off the only interesting storyline off the screen because of somebody's narcissism, and I don't really know whose. I weep for the 90-minute movie about Emma and Alyssa that could have existed with this music and with this energy. I think it would have been a movie that was 3 times better than this one. As it stands, this is really bloated with a bunch of storylines that I didn't care about, that aren't even really consequential to the overall storyline of the movie. Some of the music is great, some of the music is not so great. And I have to say, there's been a lot of conversation about this. Listen, I'm not the guy that's going to get outraged on anyone else's behalf, but James Corden, and this doesn't have anything to do with losing all the Emmys to him, I think that he is over the top, hammy, I guess you could say, in this role, from a kind of a more of an objective view. And then going a little bit deeper into that, in my opinion, it seemed like a very broad gay stereotype that we haven't seen in a movie, and I thought it was the kind of thing that was 10 or 15 years out of date. The character didn't feel mean or cynical to me. It didn't feel like it was done out of a place of cruelty. It just felt so broad. It was less of a character and more of a caricature. And that is historically oftentimes how a lot of gay characters have been portrayed in films. I think the real contrast is that you have in Joe Ellen Pellman and Ariana DeBose such an honest and grounded quality to their performance, and I really did feel for their characters. It did not go into cliche, even though I thought the story at times went into cliche. It's really hard for me to see that authenticity on the same screen as what I thought to be a very inauthentic part. I'm not necessarily laying this at James Corden's feet because, like I said, there are moments in the movie when he's a little more restrained that work for me, when he's allowed to actually be a character. But as it stands, for a lot of the movie, it just didn't land right with me. And I feel like it didn't land right with a lot of other people too. So there are pluses and minuses to The Prom. Generally, though, for me, the minuses went out just because a lot of the performance didn't work for me. The performances that I really liked, there really wasn't enough of. Meryl Streep is great, but that's really no news. I would have loved a much more focused film and a focused source material. That's not what the movie had, and ultimately, I can't recommend it. So those are my reviews of Mank and The Prom. Both kind of ups and downs, but I'm marginally higher on Mank and marginally lower on The Prom. Have you seen these films? What did you think? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you want to see even more of what I'm doing, you can check me out over on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We're coming up on our movie club. It's a holiday movie club this month. The patrons chose our movies. It's going to be a lot of fun. We also have a watch along for all of our patrons. It's going to be a double feature here in December. We're still picking the movies, so if you join up right now, you can help pick which 2 movies we're going to watch. There are movie trivia Schmodown study sessions, movie trivia Schmodown recaps, everybody that's interested in the Schmodown, lots of fun stuff. I'd love to have you come and join us. Also, don't forget I have my podcast, All My Movies. We're covering a lot of holiday films right now. We just did Die Hard. Coming up, we have Home Alone and Home Alone 2. And we're talking about one of the all-time classics, It's a Wonderful Life, in a couple weeks. I'd love to have you watch on the Schmodown Entertainment Network or listen as a downloadable podcast. You can find all that information down in the description below. And thank you so much for watching the channel. We've had a big couple weeks with all of the Disney news and all of the Warner Brothers and HBO Max news. It really does feel a little bit like how the channel might feel once things really get cooking and things start coming out a little bit more than they are now. And it feels like this could be a new normal. So for everybody that's new, that's found us in the last couple weeks with all this news, I appreciate you coming on the channel. For everyone that's been here since the beginning, thanks for watching. It is hopefully onward and upward from here, and I'll see you next time.